Okay, Dad, good morning. Today is Monday, November 4th. You excited about the election?
No.
Okay. All right, we won't even
I
talk
actually
about
had a
it.
conversation about it yesterday, which was actually unusual. I haven't even talked about it with anybody for the last several weeks.
Did you enjoy the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, this person made the argument that, okay, you just go with the lesser of two evils. We clearly have two very bad choices. And I found myself, maybe softening my position somewhat. It was saying, yeah, I'm just not voting. That's been my position. But then I started to think about Gaza again. And I understand the power of that lesser of two evils argument. Um, but then I think about Gaza and I say, this is such an evil that I just cannot vote for somebody who fully supports this. I can't, I can't tell my, grandchildren, which would be 20 years from now, that I voted for either of these people. So anyway, I'm just not voting, not in the national elections. I may cast a vote locally, for dog catcher or something.
Okay. All right, well, we won't dive into the election at all. I think that's a little bit too
Yeah,
icky, and we'll see how that plays out. Yeah, it's tough with domestic politics because I also feel icky about it, but at the same time, I'm wondering does this really matter? Is this important for these global conflicts? And sometimes I think they are, and then you can often convince me that it doesn't matter, that the machine just keeps plugging along. So we'll just wait and
yeah,
see. But something we've been talking about a lot on this podcast is just the decline of the American empire, the fall of the American empire. And I think that's something that resonates with a lot of people. People can see it and understand it. But the thing is, for me, the concept of the American Empire is a little vague to me because traditionally, when I look at history books or remember looking at maps in school, I could see the Ottoman Empire, I could see the Roman Empire. But when I look at a world map today or a globe, it just looks like every country is there by itself. There's America, and everybody's minding their own business. But clearly, that's not the case. So could you just maybe help explain to me and the audience what is the American empire? It doesn't seem to be the traditional type of empire that we have in our mind. I never really thought really of America as an empire when I was a child growing up, but
right.
now I do.
Yeah, it is not the traditional empire, which is about territory. I mean, we did have some imperial adventures, and we did seize, for example, the Philippines, right, a little better than 100 years ago. And that was an imperial holding for a while, but eventually we gave them their independence. So yeah, we don't just conquer territories and rule over them. You could say that we did that on the North American continent, right? But we stopped at the Pacific Ocean, and there was the Philippines, but that was just kind of a detour. The you look at the map of the world. Sure, you don't see territorial holdings of the U.S., but there are something like 800 military bases, U.S. military bases around the world, which is far, far more than any other country. Far, far more than Russia or China. I think Russia has like one, in Syria. And China is similar. I think they have one in like Djibouti, someplace like that. I mean, it just so there is a military presence, a U.S. military presence around the world in a way that no other country has. So that's a military, let's say, dimension of the U.S. empire. But I think the more important one is actually through the financial institutions, particularly SWIFT and the U.S. dollar. So again, like when the U.S. chose to attack Russia, that's how it launched its attack, and it thought that because it was the global hegemon, and in finances, it was going to be able to crush Russia. And now that failed. So it has this economic aspect, this system that was set up towards the end of World War II, the Bretton Woods system, and then most importantly, the use of the dollar as the world's reserve currency gives them kind of allows them to rule the world, a good part of the global economy. Now it's a shrinking part. At one time, it was almost the entire global economy. And then those bases around the world allow them to project power, through military power throughout the world. Now, again, you look at a map of Europe, and these are all independent countries, right? But we have been talking about how they really aren't. They're vassals. I mean, what kind of country, self-respecting country, allows another country to blow up its, energy infrastructure and doesn't even complain? Of course, I'm talking about Germany and its relationship to the U.S. So it is like a vassal state. It is like just even though, on the map it shows that this is Germany, it's really just a territory of the U.S. Again, the decisions are being made back in the U.S. They're not really being made in Germany. Now, of course, there are Germans that are angry about that, and maybe they'll throw off the U.S. yoke. But at the present time, Europe is firmly under the yoke of the U.S.
Can you tell me what other countries are firmly under the yoke? I mean, we got Western Europe. Is it Australia, Canada, Japan, South Korea?
Right. Okay, yeah, they call them the Five Eyes, the Anglosphere. But then also Japan. Japan has long been, firmly under U.S. control as far as, especially military questions. They don't dare to ever deviate from U.S. foreign policy and military objectives. South Korea, sometimes South Korea shows independence. It depends on who's in charge. The current president, again, is slavishly devoted to the U.S. He's like the Olaf Scholz of South Korea. So that's why, South Korea supplied the artillery shells to Ukraine because the U.S. wanted them to. And it was not good for South Korea. Again, this was not what an independent country that's pursuing its own interests would have done. But that's what a vassal state does. But South Korea, I know there's a lot of criticism of this president in South Korea. And if the opposition party comes back into power, they may reverse course and start to assert more independence. I think there's more of an independent streak in South Korea than there is in, let's say, Taiwan or Japan.
Okay, so it sounds like the American Empire is quite a modern phenomenon. And really, prior to 1945, America was a completely different country.
Yeah.
Right. So these military bases, this happened immediately after 1945, I guess as a result of the Cold War.
Right.
And so that created the military industrial complex and spread our military around the world. And then the Bretton Woods, was that 1971, or that's Nixon off the gold
Bretton Woods
standard?
Is 1944.
Okay, right. So 1971 is getting off the gold standard,
right,
which kind of put a booster jet on the fact that we're the world reserve currency, and now it's not backed by anything, right? So it's really those two things that you think are define the American empire.
Yeah, actually, maybe should point to a third thing, and that is soft power. Hollywood and cultural influences. I think, again, this power is waning also, but a couple generations ago, or a generation ago, it was just like U.S. culture, U.S. movies and music and so on just completely dominated the world. And so you had, countries where, well, even in the Soviet Union before it fell, it's just like all the young people were secretly listening to U.S. music and wearing, affecting U.S. fashion, wearing torn jeans and that kind of thing. And he found it, even in places like Iran and wherever. Again, I think that, I know that influence, that power, which is really very real and actually quite important. We call it soft, but it can, when you control the minds and hearts of a people, you control those people. But that's fading. And, it was fading already before the recent wars, but I think it's, especially like in the case of October 7th, what followed, and the genocide in Gaza and the U.S. support. I know, for example, like in Iran, there still were a lot of people who were very favorable, especially young people, favorable to the U.S., which I find amazing after all that the U.S. has done to Iran. But you still had people who really believed in them. But this genocide has almost completely put an end to that phenomenon. I mean, that has been very damaging to U.S. soft power, to the U.S. reputation.
Yeah, I feel like U.S. soft power has really declined a lot in just the past, well, like you said, since October 7th, but it was already beginning to decline a bit.
Right.
I can just remember, when it just, even just being in China just the first time in 2012, just everybody loved the fact that you're American. And
Yeah.
then things started to go a little bit south. I noticed a shift in the mood after the Hong Kong protest in, I think it was maybe 2017, 2018. Things started to change a little bit because people started to realize how the U.S. was getting involved in this type of stuff, and the people began to
Yeah.
look
It
on us
wasn't
less
an
favorably.
entirely benign influence, right?
Right. So basically, you're saying there's kind of three pillars of
Yeah.
American empire. There's the soft power, the fact that we're the reserve currency and our financial infrastructure, the SWIFT system, and our military presence around the world. Our military presence is still there. I don't think any bases have gone away, but our
Right.
military power, I think, has been exposed to a large extent, has been diminished.
To
And
a
so,
large extent, but not entirely. Again, a lot of most people in the U.S. aren't aware of it, and a lot of people around the world aren't. Because again, even though the power of U.S. media is declining, it's still very powerful. Just to give you an example, your your mother, is always listening to news from Taiwan. Now, when she goes out and she looks for her own source, she actually kind of finds an analogous source to the kind of, dissident sources that we listen to. But when news is pushed at her, it's just like the standard mainstream Taiwanese news. And it just reflects U.S. news entirely. So she's always saying, "Oh, do you hear like the North Koreans are now attacking in Kursk?" And I said, "No, they're not." But she's just getting stuff. It comes from Ukraine, goes from Ukraine to the U.S. and then is translated into Chinese and is sent off to Taiwan. And that's just true of many countries around the world. Basically their news is U.S. news. And so there are a lot of countries where people just entirely believe, the stories that are fed to them by the U.S. And one of the stories, of course, is that U.S. military might remains unrivaled, and U.S. weapon systems are by far and away the best in the world. And we know that that's not true, and people who get away from those mainstream Western sources know that it's not true. But there's still a lot of the world that believes that junk.
okay, so can you tell me, maybe walk me through these three pillars and tell me how they're being degraded and the consequences of it for the United States? I know that's a little bit tricky, but you
Yeah.
were just
Well,
kind of
I think
explaining.
okay, I touched on it. I was just talking about soft power, and part of it is, what's happened in Gaza, especially that's had a huge impact in the Middle East and places like Iran. So, I mean, there are a lot of people that used to look up to the U.S. as a moral force, a moral leader. And, they're looking at this moral leader is complicit in a genocide, right? And it makes them question too the U.S. support, of course, for Ukraine. They're told that you say, well, we just assumed that the U.S. was on the right side. Now they don't assume that anymore. I think that's you can point to a lot of things. I think that's actually I don't know what I would say about what preceded it. I think there's just been a kind of a gradual degeneration, kind of an increasing decadence in U.S. culture. And, whereas a generation ago, people sensed a real vitality and creativity. It's not that that's all gone, but I think it's fading in the U.S. And so we just don't have the edge in the creative arts that we once did. And increasingly too, they're just seeing, degeneracy, celebration of deviant lifestyles, and that may be for some, unfathomable reason, popular in the West, but in the rest of the world, it is not. They say, like, I don't want to look at this stuff, let's, so, that's soft power.
Would you
Military
say,
power. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so would you say that Israel has been by far the most damaging thing to the U.S. soft power? Like
Well,
it is
in
really,
the last year, no question about it. But over, if we're talking about the last couple of decades or something, there's obviously a lot more to it. It's not just Israel, and much of it is just internal to the U.S.
right. I mean, with Israel, it's just because the United States has always been about human rights. We
Yeah,
always talk about that. We always talk about how we are, the rules-based order and human rights, and we're always championing it. And then it's just unbelievable that we stand by Israel and help them carry
Yeah.
out this
Yeah.
genocide while we still keep on crying on. We got to help human rights. We will get mad
Yeah.
at people all around the world for minor things, the
Uh-huh.
little silly infractions that they say, oh, that's not okay. You can't do that. And then it's something that I think is really
Yeah.
exposed, just the
Oh, yeah.
hypocrisy of it.
Right.
And
And
I
there's
just,
also the hypocrisy of the support for the Ukrainians is almost as great. And I think people are, a certain part of the world is seeing that too. It's not quite so obvious. The contrast is not quite so stark as it is in Palestine, but it's there. Just to give you one example, the Ukrainians have been cracking down on the use of the Russian language. And it's something like, more than half of the people in Ukraine speak Russian as a first language. Even Zelensky himself, that was his first language, when he became president. But then under pressure, he's been, forcing himself to speak Ukrainian. It's not what his natural go-to language. But that actually that movement against Russia precedes the SMO. It goes way back to 2014, even earlier in certain parts of Ukraine. So, this is something that's clearly in violation of what Western Europeans and the U.S. stand for. These are clearly human rights violations. And it's become very extreme now. There's recently a community in Western Ukraine has hired Russian language monitors to go out and just listen to people talking out in the streets, and then they hear Russian. They nab these people, You can get into real trouble.
you can get in trouble just if you speak Russian.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. At first it was like, okay, we can't use it in the schools, and you can't use it in the ROD, you can't use it in government agencies. But now it's just you cannot speak Russian, even out on the streets. That's what's happening. It's a totalitarian crackdown. It's an obvious violation of human rights. Now, in contrast, in the Russian-controlled territories of eastern Ukraine, the Donbass, Kherson, these places that are now under Russian control, the Russians have made it crystal clear that everybody has the right to speak the language of their choice. And if you want your children educated in Ukrainian in the schools, we will provide Ukrainian language teacher and Ukrainian language materials, that this is your right. And now, you would think that this is something that would warm the hearts of Western Europeans, and the U.S., but, they're just such hypocrites. And we can hide that fact from our own people, but much of the world is seeing it. So it's not just in Israel where, the hypocrisy is being exposed. It's also in Ukraine.
Right. I mean, soft power is all about telling the world what you stand for. And we always hid behind the guise of human rights. That's what we stand for. That makes you a good person. If you support human rights and you want everybody to have freedom and to live the life to their fulfill the best of their abilities. But it seems to be a sham. So now, like, is the U.S. trying to put something else out there, like what we stand for? Like, what does the American empire or the U.S.
They seem to be repeating the same thing. Well, except that now, the same kind of things that you would hear 20 years ago, right? So, we're about freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, all that, the things that we value and that are enshrined in our Constitution. But now there's a whole new layer of woke ideology on top of it. Gay rights, transgender rights, radical feminism, this kind of thing. And so that, that's actually, it's gone to the fore. It's like what particularly angered the EU about Georgia was the passage of the law against propagandizing, minors with regard to LGBTQ. And so that's what set them off. I mean, it's they talk about human rights, but for them, that's like the most sacred rights of all. And that just has not, the idea of freedom and is a popular idea throughout the world, but like transgender pronoun rights or something is not. you have to be within the hothouse environment of the West to actually believe in that. And obviously a lot of Westerners themselves don't, but you have to be part of that establishment, that ideological vanguard that really runs things here in the West and is trying to impose those values on the world to believe in that. The rest of the world just thinks it's crazy. And so, the more we push it, the more resistance you get.
Okay, so soft power is declining. We are trying to still hide behind this human rights guys, but in a large part it is the human rights focus isn't about people actually dying in Gaza or people not allowed to speak their own language or being persecuted for whatever reason it is. It's our focus is more on the woke ideology. That's our human rights kind of vehicle, more so, is what you're saying.
Well, that seems to be the main emphasis, and at the same time, we're just completely hypocritical about the other things. We obviously don't give a damn about the lives of Gazans or the rights of Russian speakers in Ukraine. It's just like we're very selective about the other kinds of rights that we champion.
Okay, and then so what about the other one? You were just about to jump into our military power as this pillar of American empire and its decline as well.
Right. Well, that's something we've discussed quite a bit here. So I won't go into any detail about that, just to say that, at one time, let's say in the 1990s, the U.S. was, the world's hyperpower. Not just, I think you could point to all three pillars, and it was certainly true. We had our military might was unrivaled at that time. We did have by far the most advanced weapon systems. And, every tin pot dictator, every corrupt Middle Eastern government wanted to have our weapons and was willing to fork over many billions of dollars to have them. And, so it was, with those weapons comes a relationship. It's just like it means becoming part of the U.S. Alliance. Even if it's not a formal alliance, that you're brought within the U.S. military empire and you're made part of it. And that's what countries around the world were very eager to do that. And some of them still are, but I think they're really foolish. Like, Armenia right now is Pashinyan, I think, is the president there, and he's living 20 years in the past, and he's just so eager to become part of NATO, and he doesn't understand how the world has really changed. A lot of people, a lot of political leaders don't. Again, it's just like consciousness, awareness really lags behind the facts. But the facts is that U.S. military power is in relative decline. And is being surpassed, by Russia, by China, and by Iran. That's one thing that we've seen. It's just clear that Iran figured out what they needed to do to fight a war in the 21st century. And we're still living in the 1990s. Again, we have a great Air Force for bombing poor countries. At a time when we didn't have rivals, that we had our equipment really was just spectacular. We could just blow up mud huts and everything wherever we wanted to. But now, these countries like Iran have figured out how you fight a war in the 21st century. And we're saying, we'll have to make sure to keep out of Iranian airspace.
Right. But it looks like we might really get involved in this war with Iran.
We might. We're allowing ourselves to be pulled into it. We're already involved. There's no question. We're already involved. We took part in that recent failure of an attack on Iran a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure there are going to be future Israeli attacks, and we'll be involved again, and who knows, maybe in a bigger way. We said, right. Okay. Yeah, nothing to add there.
Yeah, let's jump into Iran in just a minute. But just to wrap everything up, can you talk to me about the financial power of the United States? Just recap the SWIFT system, the reserve currency status, and how that's playing out for the United States and the consequences for the U.S.
Right. Well, again, the SWIFT system is it's a payment system I guess you're being really technical. It's a messaging system, between banks in different countries, but it makes possible payments across international borders. And over time, it became the international payment system. So if you wanted, one company wanted to buy something, import some kind of materials or equipment from another country, the payments would be made through SWIFT. If I wanted to send money to a family member in another country, I would end up making the payment through SWIFT. It's just how everything was done. So now the SWIFT is not based in the U.S. I believe it's based in Brussels, but it's under firm U.S. control. And so what the U.S. decided to use this system, its control over the system, to attack Russia in 2022 after the launch of the SMO. And they said they called it the sanction from hell. They were going to cut the Russia off from SWIFT. So that, they thought, well, they're just going to shrivel up and die because that's how people do business and they won't be able to do it anymore, right? Well, it created some problems, but amazingly few problems. I think partly Russia was preparing for this. They saw this coming years ago. So they had alternative systems set up. And there was a little hiccup, but then they just, a very brief recession in Russia. And then they just went on, continued to grow. And they found these alternative systems. They may not work quite as well, but I think over time they will. That's part of what BRICS is about, is creating these alternative systems. I think they call it, there's the BRICS Bridge. That's basically the alternative to SWIFT. And then there's BRICS Clear, BRICS Pay, that's other aspects of the international financial infrastructure. And my understanding is they've started on all these projects. I don't know how long it'll take for them to complete them. But when these new BRICS systems go online, there will be, a fully functioning alternative to SWIFT. And, obviously BRICS member states can use it, but other states can as well. You don't have to be a member of BRICS to use them. And I think it will accelerate this movement away from the dollar.
Will there also be, I guess, probably some advantages in the new system and just in terms of transaction speeds and lower costs? The SWIFT system is actually pretty slow. And I mean, he said it was built
because it was established decades ago. Right. Well, the SWIFT, I think it wasn't in the 40s. That came along later. But yeah, I think they can. That's late developers often have an advantage, right? They can start from scratch and adopt the newest technologies. And I think that you're probably right. It'll end up even being superior to SWIFT.
Right. Faster, more secure, lower transaction fees. And really, that makes a huge difference in payments. People will just gravitate to what's easier. So we'll probably see adoption. It's hard to say how it'll go, but I'm sure old habits die hard. So I'm sure both systems will be operating for a while.
Even without these BRICS systems, there's clearly a movement away from the dollar, a significant movement over the last couple of years, ever since the SMO, where the U.S. began to weaponize the dollar, weaponize SWIFT, and so on. The world saw that and said, man, we got to look for some alternatives. This is not, we always thought that this was just sort of a neutral currency that everybody could trust. Like this was a store anybody could go into and buy whatever you wanted, right? And we found out, no, it isn't. They just might nab you when you go into the store, and throw you in the back room. I'm keeping out of this store,
Right. And then take your money too.
Right.
But prior to 2022, I mean, the U.S. has been using economic sanctions for a while. So obviously this isn't the newest weaponization of the dollar. Was there something specifically different about 2022? I guess it was the freezing of the Russian assets. That was something.
That too. Well, they had done similar things to Iran. But Russia is so much larger than Iran. So it's just like, my hat's off to Iran. I think Iran is the true pioneer. Iran is, if you kind of look like the whole BRICS multipolar movement, the leader really is Iran. They are the first ones to step out. And they did it kind of openly back in 1979. I remember that. And but they were just by themselves and easily demonized and against very powerful opponents. But they survived, and there was attempts to just destroy them through an invasion. The West supported a war against them. The Iraq invaded Iran. The West supplied Iraq with chemical weapons that were used against Iran. But Iran survived all of that, and then survived, increasingly severe sanctions over the years, and they really suffered, they survived, and now they're not alone. I think the next big one, of course, was Russia, and that's made a huge difference to them. And China is still kind of on the fence. They're like, they're struggling. They're trying to keep, for I think obvious reasons, because they have so much trade with the West. They don't want to. They want to maintain friendly relations as much as possible, but they're just finding it increasingly difficult because of the unrelenting hostility from the West. So it's like if, leading the pack is Iran, and then Russia, and then China's in third, but there is this obvious movement away from the dollar and, away from Western hegemony. There's the sanctions. Right, they've been used before, but just on a much smaller scale. The main target of sanctions before Russia was Iran, but Iran is, it's not a small country, but it's still much smaller than Russia. And it's just when they went after Russia, that was a huge mistake. Because I remember at the time thinking, well, if Iran has survived all these decades, of course Russia is. Russia's the largest country in the world. It's got more natural resources than any country in the world, and it's got a long border with the world's greatest manufacturing power. So what are they thinking? It's obviously not going to work. I thought they were going to be hurt, but it was just, it hurt a lot more than they were. But obviously it failed. It was just, it was stupid, like so many of the other moves that Western leadership have made in the last few years.
Yeah, so that's an interesting perspective. I think it's true that Iran was really the pioneer.
Yeah.
Like every country, the U.S. uses these three things: its soft power, its financial system, the SWIFT system, its military might, to pressure and to make every country cower and adopt the U.S. system, U.S. ideology. And Iran seemed to be the first one that was the fly in the ointment that stood up and said, no, we're not doing this. And they survived. And once you've survived all that pressure, then there's no really putting that genie back in the bottle. It's out, right? It was gave the example to the world that, hey, we showed you that you can do it. And once you have survived, and your economy starts building and going up, then you're impervious. You don't have all these threats. It's so scary the first time taking this type of step, because you would think like, well, maybe they will just completely destroy us. We'll just completely collapse. And then they did. So it kind of showed the way. And now Russia has, and now you have Russia is such a large country. It really has changed the whole dynamic of the world, that everybody's able to look and see that, okay, there is an alternative now. You can stand up to the American empire. So I think the fact that Iran did it and now Russia did, that's really kind of the death blow to the American empire. That shows there isn't a one system anymore.
Right.
Is that fair to say?
I think it is. The American empire is still standing, but I think it has received its death blow. It's dying. Yeah.
Okay, and we shouldn't be scared that it received the death blow. That should be good. We can get
it's
back to looking at the.
It's good for we Americans. It really is. The empire is bad for us.
Right. We can look at the world map and see like, oh, there's America, and America takes care of Americans, and they're there in America, not this. Using all its tentacles to influence the world and affect color revolutions and regime changes and assassinations, etc. Okay, well, let's move over to Iran and Israel a bit. So I don't know about you, but I've been checking my phone pretty much every 15 minutes, waiting for the strike. So just what's your current assessment of the situation right now between Iran and Israel?
Well, clearly Iran is going to strike. They repeated that, including Ayatollah Khamenei has made it very clear that they're going to strike, and they're going to strike hard, apparently harder than they have so far. They haven't said anything about when, so we just don't know, but it could be any time. It could be as we speak, or it could be 2 days from now, or a week from now, 2 weeks from now. Who knows? Um, but they're going to strike.
Well, in the last episode you did, I believe we were talking that we were hearing rumors that the strike would happen before the election. The
Yeah,
election is tomorrow. Do you
yeah,
still believe that it could happen before the election, or do you think that was just kind of
yeah,
noise? And
yeah.
do you think the election plays into
Who
the
knows?
calculation for Iran?
I regard that as a rumor. Most rumors don't amount to anything. It may prove that it was more than a rumor. We'll see. Um, it certainly could happen before the election. One thing is I don't know why the Iranians would do it in this case. Maybe just to annoy or play with the Americans. They might, just as they released the hostages back in, I guess it was 1980, or maybe it was actually 1981. I think it was right out when Reagan was inaugurated in January 1981. On that very day, they released the hostages. So sometimes they have, they have done this in the past. They've timed their actions, synchronized them with events in the U.S. So it's possible. I mean, it could happen tonight or tomorrow. They may make a point of it. They have yesterday they were actually celebrating the anniversary of the takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. I believe it was yesterday, or maybe it was the day before. Um, and they have an interesting name for it. I think it's called like the Day Against U.S. Arrogance. That's not exactly it, but that's basically the idea.
Yeah,
So,
I've heard that. Something about U.S. arrogance.
yeah,
Right.
so they might do it. Just sort of like to poke a finger in the eye of the Americans. They might do it tomorrow. We'll see.
Right. Well, what's interesting as well is I believe the Ayatollah mentioned the United States along with Israel as the enemy that will deliver a devastating blow to the U.S. and Israel. Is that true? That's what you heard as well?
I Yeah, I don't know that he said he was going to deal a devastating blow against the U.S. as well as Israel, but they understand that the U.S. was involved.
Right.
So there is a possibility that there could be U.S. targets, but I don't think they've specified that yet. I haven't heard that.
Right. I mean, that's what concerns me as well, is that we do have all these military bases throughout the region that are sitting ducks.
Right.
We have two THAAD systems, each with 100 American troops operating them in Israel. These could be potential valid targets, especially if these air bases were aiding in the attack on Iran earlier. So, and I'm just wondering if Iran is confident enough after they saw what Israel tried to do, and that Iran came out relatively unscathed, that they think that maybe we can just take it on. We can, the Americans aren't going to be able to handle it either. So
Maybe. I think Iran is experiencing growing confidence. Like they thought that they could handle the Israelis and the Americans. They had been preparing for this for a long time. But there's always a question in your mind, right? Maybe they're going to crush us. They're so much bigger. They're so much powerful. They've crushed so many countries in the past. And I think when actually the dust settled and there was really very little dust, they saw, hey, no, they couldn't do much. They were even stronger than we thought, and say, okay, let's go for it. Let's
Right.
deliver a knockout blow or something. There's a possibility that they're thinking that way.
Right. I mean, we've talked about this before, is that if Israel has the capability, which, it does have Jerichos, it does have nuclear warheads, that, when its back is up against the wall, they may need to escalate immediately. They tried to do this attack, the SEAD, suppression of air defense. It just didn't work. They weren't able to suppress Iranian air defense. So they don't really have, I feel like, that many options left unless they just go nuclear. And perhaps Iran is just thinking about that. And so this next attack, they think that, okay, we got to go real hard, because if we do again, Israel might just go nuclear right away. Do you think that's part of the calculation?
I don't know. I mean, they have to be thinking about the Samson option. They understand that that's in the background there. That's something that Israel could always choose to exercise. Um, therefore, well, I think in light of that, uh, Iranian leaders recently have been making some statements about their nuclear program, and they're suggesting that they should reconsider the ban on the development of nuclear weapons.
Right. I've been hearing that
Yeah,
as well.
right.
Do you think that I mean, they probably have already started it and maybe are very close, and now they're letting it seep out? Because it doesn't make sense to make some statements that say that they're reconsidering it. Um,
Well, well, who knows? It may be that they're not really have no intention of starting a nuclear weapons program, but they decide, well, at least we'll say this, and that will make our adversaries think twice. Who knows? But they can't. I don't think they're actually, started down the road of developing a nuclear weapon because their nuclear power program is very carefully monitored. And if there was like a diversion of nuclear materials that could be used for weapons development, that would have been detected already. So I think it's clear that they have not made that decision, but they just may. That's what they're saying. It would be just again would expose the monumental stupidity of Israeli and U.S. policy. You've been saying that you're concerned about development of nuclear weapons in Iran. For all these decades, have been screaming about it. You got that agreement put in place, the JPOAC, which was a really extraordinarily stringent agreement. That provided oversight and really total control of nuclear materials within Iran. And the U.S. blew it up under Israeli pressure. It was
Trump
like
that
if
did
you
it,
really were
right?
concerned about it, you would have kept that. I mean, it was really excessive, but it made it absolutely impossible for them, within any a reasonable span of time to start a nuclear weapons program. But it was really under Israeli pressure. I think the Israelis were thinking is that, okay, no, they've been hoping to use the excuse of a nuclear weapons program in Iran to attack Iran. And when the JCPOA took that away and they didn't like it, again, it's just like Israel is always, kills the moderates, kills the peaceful solutions, the compromises, because they're always looking for war. And he said, this takes away our excuse for war. Say, okay, Israel, you got what you wished. And now, are you so sure that you really, really want this war? I think they really severely miscalculated.
Right. Yeah, we've talked about this so many times, but it just doesn't seem like there's any way out for Israel. And if there's no way out for Israel, then that just means that the Samson option will likely be executed, right?
Right. Well, yeah, I'm fearful of that. I mean, again, I think if nuclear weapons going to be used somewhere in the world in the next, we'll say 5 years, I would say much better than 90% it'll happen in the Middle East and it will be delivered by Israel.
I mean, 5 years. I mean, I'm thinking like the
Yeah, well,
next
I
three
know I'm
months.
being actually very. You could say 6 months. I don't know. It's just I don't know. I'm being very generous with the time there.
If that happens, and I think it's a very likely possibility, that a nuclear weapon, Israel does use a nuclear weapon, what would the U.S. do? Would we stand up and applaud Israel's use of the nuclear weapon? Will our elite stand up and say, like, yes, that was the right thing to do?
Israel had to do it.
Israel had to do it.
It was hard for them, but they had no choice. Yeah, we'll stand by them. I'm sure it's going to create a lot of anger and dissent within the U.S., but the leadership will stand by Israel.
Do you
It
think that
could
could
lead
break
to a
America?
long term, eventually, it could strengthen the anti-Israeli forces such as they are, and they're very, very, very minor within the U.S., but it would strengthen them and it could lead to eventual, change of power within this change of regime here in this country. But in the short run, I don't think they're incapable of saying anything else. They will always stand by Israel. Right.
Well, it would really destroy the American empire because, we've talked
Oh,
about
yeah, it'll be very harmful for us, too. I mean, we've tied ourselves to Israel, and Israel has shown itself to be, a homicidal maniac. And so, the world's say, okay, Israel's got blood on its hands, but we're spattered with Israeli blood.
Right. I mean, any guise of human rights at that point would just be laughable.
Yeah,
right.
well, it's already laughable, but it'll be that much more laughable. You're right.
Okay. Well, another thing that just damaging blow to the reputation of Israel and the United States as well is Israel. I don't know if you've seen this, just terminated the agreement with UNRWA.
Yeah.
Can you tell me why they did that and what are the consequences for the Palestinians, first of all?
Oh yeah, well, because UNRWA is the reason that most Gazans are still alive today. I mean, UNRWA feeds them, cares for them, provides them with shelter, with medical care, such, limited medical care, because again, all the hospitals have been destroyed in Gaza by the Israelis. But it's just like the last institution standing between really total starvation and the Gazans right now.
So how dire is this? I mean,
it's already dire. It's just, yeah. It really means just a faster genocide. I don't know what to say. It's horrible beyond belief.
Well, so do you think we'll start to see mass starvation in the near future if UNRWA is completely cut off? I mean, how does aid get
I think we're seeing it now. It's just it's going to speed up, accelerate, I don't see how that can be avoided.
Well, the Biden administration a couple of weeks ago said that if Israel doesn't allow more humanitarian aid in within a month, and that they would consider cutting off supplies. It seems like just this move here is the Israelis said, okay, you told us to let in more humanitarian aid, now we're cutting off all humanitarian aid.
Right.
That's the response.
Yeah.
And what is the U.S. going to do?
Nothing.
We'll do nothing, right?
Right. Nothing.
It's such a pathetic.
Right. The whole thing was that was just a show. There was never any substance to that.
I just can't believe
that threat by the U.S.
I just can't believe that we keep on saying these things, and we allow it. Especially what's happening here in Gaza. It's not like it's some natural disaster and bad things are happening. It was unavoidable. We're just watching it happen for over a year now. Just keep on going, and now we're talking about starving them because Israel has declared that some UNRWA members are Hamas members. Can you talk about that at all?
That was a claim that was made, at least half a year ago. And immediately several Western European countries and the U.S. cut off aid to UNRWA. And then an investigation was done, and there was just nothing to it. The Israeli claims were false. And they lied, as they do again and again. Now, I believe that all the Western European countries that had cut off aid to UNRWA have reestablished that aid. I think the U.S. still, I may be wrong. Maybe they've started making payments again, but I think that they have not yet reversed the decision, even though the Israeli claims have been shown definitively to be false.
About that humanitarian pier that we built as well to help them out too.
That was just a joke. I've never made a bit of sense to me. It's just a little comic relief,
Since October 1st, when Iran first struck Israel, have we seen sort of an increase in the acceleration of the genocide? I feel like there's been this problem in Gaza that we've just been stuck at this number of like 45,000 for months now. And I think the reason is because there's no more hospitals or infrastructure left to do the accounting. So it's just frozen. Right. So we don't know.
These families, when the family member is severely injured or whatever, they don't, or has been killed. It used to be they could take the body to the morgue, take the injured family member to the hospital, and there maybe the family member would die and the death would be recorded. There aren't even any hospitals to take them to. That doesn't even take into account all the bodies that are under the rubble. they haven't been able to, they don't have the equipment to actually remove the rubble and find, what's under there. But there's certainly many, many, many bodies under there. So yeah, that figure it's got to be just a fraction of the real one. And then again, we're not talking about indirect deaths at all. People that have died of disease and so on and so forth. Those kind of people are not included in the figures at all.
What's just so shocking to me is that this genocide is the most documented genocide of all time.
Yeah.
Yet we have many, obviously the Israelis deny the accusations of genocide. Many people in the United States do.
Some of them celebrate it. Let's be honest. They don't all deny it. I mean, when they're talking to the U.S., they deny it. But among themselves, they often celebrate it. They know what they're doing. It's not a secret within Israel.
Well, that makes it even worse.
It's on TV. Right.
I mean, that just makes it so much worse that they're openly celebrating the genocide, that they're not trying to hide it, and everybody sees it. And now on top of that, we're going to try to execute, sounds like a mass starvation plan with this UNRWA termination. Do you think that's the goal? What's the point of doing that?
Yeah, I think it is. I think there's no question about it. I mean, it's just, it's consistent with everything else they've done. They've greatly reduced, the amount of humanitarian supplies, which were already limited, which were already less than, what was sufficient, even before October 7th. And they've just systematically destroyed the hospitals. So UNRWA's next. It's just like, of course, why do they want UNRWA to stand? It's just the one institution that's keeping them alive. They methodically destroyed all the other institutions that supported life in Gaza. So why not destroy UNRWA? That just seems like the obvious next step, and that's what they've done. That's what they're doing now.
It's just so crazy.
They had launched many attacks against, UNRWA personnel. I think at least a couple hundred UNRWA personnel had been killed by Israeli forces, and many, many UNRWA buildings and vehicles have been destroyed. So it's not like they had been sparing them, but now they're just going to finish the job.
Well, if they try to finish the job, as you say, this will give a real sense of urgency, I believe, to the axis of resistance to Iran and to Hezbollah, that they might have to, they'll have to expedite this, or
it could be.
The thing is, I just don't understand. It's like, we've seen so many videos of children shredded, blown apart, and now we're going to probably start seeing videos and pictures of children starving to death. And it's just, I don't understand how we can just hide that. We can't hide it. And so it's just how we can just continue to go along with it and expect everything to be okay, and that everybody will respect the United States and respect our position in the world. They're clearly not. And to try to paint Iran as the bad guys, as we get involved in this conflict, the whole world is going to be against us. Yeah. I mean, I feel like Iran is going to, the United States, I think, is alone on this. We've seen it in these UN votes again and again. It's just the United States and maybe one or two small countries it's bribed, but it's really alone. I mean, we can't even count on our vassals. And this will probably mean that these vassal states that we were talking about at the beginning, like Germany and whatever, they will be overthrown. We'll see changes in all these other countries, and then the United States will be done. I would say the empire will be done, which is a good thing. I guess that's just the way it has to happen, that we have wedded ourselves to something that is truly evil. And we are just letting it destroy the empire, which I guess is a good thing, that it's destroying the empire. It's just so horrific that we are going to be tainted with a genocide. That is going to be written into the annals of American history, is that we were complicit in this genocide. And it's just, it's such a terrible, horrible thing to have as part of your history as an American. Yeah. I think every American should feel ashamed and horrified by this prospect. I mean, I think it's even because we know, you know, deep down inside, either you refuse to look into it deeply enough to understand, and you just convince yourself and lie to yourself that, oh yeah, they're just somehow all terrorists and bad guys. And you play these mental gymnastics, but it's there. It's not like it's hiding. It's when we talk about the Nazis in World War II, obviously horrible, terrible, but it's not like everybody in Berlin was aware of what was happening in these concentration camps. It was, for the most part, hidden within the elites. It's not something that was being celebrated amongst the German population. But here it's just, we can see it. It's the 21st century. People have smartphones. We can watch it. We see the video of a teenager being burned alive in a hospital bed. Like, these things are going to haunt the American consciousness for forever, and I don't know what point I'm trying to make here.
Yeah.
It's just frustrating, and it's
Right.
just
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of people, and what you say is true, but there are a lot of people. I still am amazed by how many people, how many intelligent, otherwise well-informed people are not aware of what's going on. Because if you stay within the mainstream bubble, it's not happening. There's no genocide. It's just like, it's a very unfortunate war. Israel's doing what it can to reduce civilian casualties, but the evil Hamas are constantly using the poor, innocent Palestinians as human shields, and so on and so forth. And there are a lot of people, within the West who actually believe that. But once you get out, especially in the younger generation, or even within the West, many people see through it. And then when you get outside of the West, by and large, people see through it. If you're not in one of those vassal states.
Do you think that Israel might just essentially kill everybody in Gaza? I mean, it seems like they're. I mean,
I think they're well on the way. I mean, I saw a figure,
then you can't deny it,
right? A couple months ago, that I think maybe predicted, or even it may have been just like an estimate of how many have been killed already. But it was like 25% of the population had been killed or soon would be killed. Again, that's considering all the people that are under the rubble, the deaths that were reported, and then all the indirect deaths, which are always a greater number than the direct deaths, the people who die, from disease and so forth. So that was a quarter of the population. I think we could be very easily looking at least half the population, and it could be more.
Well, eventually that's going to come out, right? And then
I think
all
it
these
has
people,
to, right? I think it just cannot be hidden. So yeah, it is just it's going to be a black, shameful mark on the conscience of the West. On the
really
West,
America,
America in particular, but Britain and Germany also have been very active supporters of Israel.
Oh man, it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, you're finding some real resistance within France, and I think that, interestingly, is largely because of France's connection to Lebanon.
Right.
It's like when they went into Lebanon, there are a lot of French speakers in Lebanon, and so the French knew what's going on, and they have connections, and so they feel like they're, this time it's their own interests, their own people to some extent that are being attacked. So you finally find, Macron, putting a little bit of muscle, behind his words against Israel now.
Yeah, it's just a weird feeling that, most of Americans, if you just watch our mainstream media and our elites, they just paint Iran as this, the head of the snake, the evil. And then, but when you just take a look at it, it's just like Iran is the one country that is trying to stop the genocide,
right?
Is saving it. And, they issued that statement as well for this attack. They said, we will lessen this attack, make it less severe if you get a ceasefire. We need to stop this. Right. That's what it is. It's
they were ready to call off the attack if there was a ceasefire. It's the same with Hezbollah. You have to admire these people. These are like one of the few countries and armies in the world that really live by moral principles. The Houthis, Hezbollah, Iran, and in general the axis of resistance. Yeah, I think you have to. My hat's off to them. These are brave, principled people.
I mean, it just, when you look at the situation, when you learn about it, study it, just us talking about it, it's not even. People like to say things are complicated or it's nuanced. This isn't complicated. Right. It's clear. It's clear that the people that are trying to prevent the genocide are the good guys. The people that are committing the genocide and are complicit in abetting the genocide are clearly the bad guys. And it's just I don't know, there's maybe some sort of cognitive dissonance in many of the people because it's hard being part of a country, being an American, and realizing that, hey, we are truly the bad guys, that this isn't a black and white thing, a complicated thing. And these people that we're painting out to be the enemy these are the people that have the moral high ground, that are honorable, that care about about the sanctity of human life. Is what we are painting as the terrorists, that we want to go to war and attack them. And there's a possibility that the United States will get dragged into a war with Iran, who is the moral figure here, and that we will be told to fight this moral figure, the one that's trying to prevent a genocide, to allow Israel to continue its genocide. That's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for the right for Israel to commit genocide, and it's just a horrific situation.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Yeah. No, you're not exaggerating. It is, and that's why to complete the circle, that's why I cannot vote for either candidate tomorrow. That's the reason. I understand the lesser of two evils argument, but I don't want to have anything to do with those people and with this genocide.
It's true. We can argue about all types of social issues or whatever, but this is just wrong. What's happening? It's just evil, and it's so insane, so frustrating that we are so complicit in something that is so obviously evil, that's so apparent to me, and it's clearly becoming apparent to the rest of the world. And it's just something I hope people wake up and we see the light, and we're not staying. Yeah, they are. Well, okay, we'll end it there before I get too worked up. Okay, all right, Dad. All right, thanks a lot. Have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Bye.